Is the Ingram angle. We have big news for you tonight, this Friday night. The angle is coming up later in the show. You're not going to want to miss it. And then Brexit champion Nigel Farage is going to tell us how to keep this populist conservative movement going strong, especially amidst all the pushback from the left. But first, breaking revelations tonight. It's amazing about the Florida school shooting. As gun control advocates are targeting the NRA, we're going to be finding out more about what actually happened on the ground during that Parkland massacre and how maybe some common sense policing could have made all the difference. Apparently, it wasn't just one deputy on the scene who didn't engage the shooter. According to a new report, there were 4 total sheriff's deputies on the scene who did not enter the building during the shooting. Police say it's too early to make definitive conclusions. But yesterday, the Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel said just one person, it was Scott Peterson, who stayed outside instead of trying to stop the suspect. A union rep says that Peterson, who has since resigned, believes he did a good job. Now, let's get to the bottom of all of this with Jeff Bell. He's the president of Broward Sheriff's Office Deputies Association, who is also a sheriff's deputy himself. It's good to see you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. These new reports that came out, absolutely, the new reports that came out now have a total of 4 sheriff's deputies who did not enter that school building as the shooting was taking place. What do you know about this tonight?
I've heard rumors about that report myself, but I have nothing to substantiate any of those claims are factual at this time.
Well, Scott Peterson, let's start with him because he has resigned. He was apparently behind a police vehicle with his gun drawn at the time that other officials showed up at the scene. Can you walk us through what protocol is for this type of active shooter situation, Jeff?
Well, for the active shooter, Deputy Peterson being the first officer on scene, he did what he was trained to do at the beginning, for the first minute, responded directly to the area where shots were being fired, called out the location, called in other support units that were arriving for backup. But at that point, he stopped there of what he needed to do. As law enforcement officials, we know that every day when we go to work that there's a chance that we may not come home to our family members. And we accept that responsibility. And when we hear an active shooter, I don't care if it's within a school, a mall, a house, or an office building, when you are the first person there on scene, every second that you delay going into that building and every single gunfire that you hear from inside that building, that means that there's another innocent life being lost. And it's unacceptable not to go inside that building. We know that risk when we put the uniform on every single day, and we have to live up to that oath that we take.
Now, do you know Officer Peterson?
No, I do not. I've only had one conversation with him. And
what occurred in that conversation?
Just to brief him what was about to transpire within the next hour in terms of the administrative moves that were going to happen in terms of being suspended without pay, and an internal affairs investigation would start.
Oh, the Coral Springs police are apparently the ones who are talking, and that's why we got this new report about the 3 Broward deputies who showed up and also didn't enter the building. So why would the Coral Springs officers express their frustration if they had entered the building or if this hadn't occurred? Doesn't that, given the fact that we have, again, 17 dead and we have more than a week has transpired, we still don't have the clear tick-tock on what happened? That seems a little much, don't you think, given the public outcry here?
Well, given the public outcry, I can say that there was a lot of chaos on scene that night. I don't doubt the actions of some of the Coral Springs police officers that were there that day. However, I don't know enough information to comment if those were the first officers on scene or if those officers that went into the building first from Coral Springs, they came out and then they saw additional deputies. So I don't have enough information to comment at that at this time.
Sheriff Israel basically echoed what you said about how this guy Peterson should have engaged the shooter. You're there, shots are ringing out, you don't stand outside, you go in. And that's like the firefighters at 9/11, they went up in the building when, you know, everybody else was leaving. That's your job, that's what you do. That's the danger of being a police officer. But you actually have made comments about the school board in Broward County and you lay some blame, frankly, on them for what happened. Explain that to us.
Yes, I do. I think that's the one entity in this whole conversation that has not been brought up is some of the fault that I put on the Broward County School Board. For years, they know that the schools have been soft targets, and they claim that they want to have better police presence inside the schools and they want tougher security, but yet they do not want to cough up the money to pay for that better security and fortify their schools and have better designs. They don't want that. And then when they are fortunate enough to have a school resource deputy on scene, an armed police presence, a lot of the liberal thinking principals that are on campus there, they don't want the police officers making arrests on campus, and they don't want the drugs to be found on campus, and they don't want the warrants to be served on campus because it looks like there's bad stats at the school. So I place a lot of blame on the school board with that and some of the programs that they've initiated with the state attorney and the sheriff's office in the years past. For example, the Promise program. Nobody wants to fill the jails with juveniles. Every police officer will agree on that. So the Promise program is a intervention program where we can stop filling the juvenile jails with kids, and we can get them into some alternative programs. But the problem is, when that program started, we took all discretion away from the law enforcement officers to effect an arrest if we choose to. Now, there's a lot of parents out there that are screaming for help in terms of mental health services.
Well, it seems like that was the case here. I mean, right. Well, we had 23 calls go to the Broward Sheriff's Office about this family. Some were about Nicholas Cruz's brother. Others were about Cruz, and still, including calls regarding his potential for violence. And again, you're the expert here. You represent the union here, but 23 calls to one house. And you add that with the FBI tips that they got in 2016 and as early as in November and apparently another one in February. This is wild stuff. I mean, red flag after red flag after red flag.
It is. They are looking into that right now with those calls, but I can tell you it's not an uncommon thing where we spend 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week that we respond to the same house for the same problem over and over again. And so what your limitations are what? The only way you can, I mean, you could sit down with Nicholas Cruz, correct? I mean, I imagine he doesn't seem too bright. I imagine you could sit down and just ask him questions. Can I look around? Right? Could I look around? Do you have any guns? Can I see where they are? Can I see where they're stored? That conversation, do you have any idea whether that took place? I do not have any of that information right now as part of an internal affairs investigation.
Yeah,
it is, but I'm not privileged to comment on that because it's an ongoing investigation that would be violating state statute by commenting on that.
The NRA demonization that's going on right now is unlike anything I've ever seen. I mean, they're trying to basically take them off television, kill off all the businesses that, take their ads and so forth, give discounts to NRA members. What's your sense on that?
I firmly believe this is not a gun issue. I've said this from day one, and I'll hold that belief until the day I die. It's not the gun that's the problem. It's the person behind the gun that is the problem. And the problem that we face here today is not going to be a simple fix. And I'm afraid to say that I don't even think that there's going to be an outcome that's going to fix this problem, because until we can link the mental health records into the criminal background checks that we do to purchase a firearm, we're not going to see if a person had a mental health issue. So that has to be resolved with the Medical Association and the HIPAA law violations to release that information.
Well, Sheriff Israel,
that needs to be addressed.
I hear you, but Sheriff Israel yesterday or today said, well, what I think we need to do in America is something different, have less guns. I think he means fewer. Less guns on our streets, not more guns. So he's taken a different view from you. That's the sheriff.
Yeah, he is my boss and he is my sheriff. Right? Correct. He is my boss and he is my sheriff, and he does sign my paychecks, but that doesn't mean that I have to have the same opinions as the sheriff does. I think we need to intervene with the people that hold the gun, not the gun itself. So until we address the real problem, which is the mental health issue, and the attitude of the state attorney's office of releasing these people out on the street, nothing's going to change.
Deputy Sheriff Bell, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll be following every aspect of this ongoing investigation. Stay right there, everybody, because we have Michelle Malk and Colonel Allen West. They're going to join us to analyze all these latest developments, the plot to undermine, and I think ultimately, if they could, take down the NRA, and one that seems to be, for the moment, having some Companies targeted by that left-wing website Think Progress are rapidly dropping ties with the National Rifle Association. The list of companies ending discounts for NRA members already includes MetLife, Hertz, Enterprise, Alamo, Symantec, and First National Bank of Omaha. Well, this comes after more than a week of liberals and students blaming the NRA for school shootings.
Any politician on either side who is taking money from the NRA is responsible for events like this.
The NRA does not win in the chat room. It wins in the cloakroom of state legislatures and the national government. Unless we get bags of money and bags of votes to pull these people the other way, we're going to lose.
We got to take on the NRA.
Let's discuss this with conservative Review Television host Michelle Malkin in Colorado Springs and Fox News contributor Colonel Allen West in New York. It's great to see both of you. Michelle, look, you're on CRTV, and you and I have dealt with this issue for years, where the left loses the debates on substance, and so they go for banning speech. And now they're doing this with the NRA. What say you?
That's right. And this tactic has been used successfully by leftist speech squelchers. They have targeted conservative talk radio hosts. They've targeted other conservative figures and Republicans and conservative businesses. And it really is time for law-abiding gun owners to push back, to draw the line, because these people who are responsible for these witch hunts are inciting hatred and violence. And you know, the thing is that so many conservatives always act in good faith, and they don't want to engage in these kinds of tactics.
Well, they're afraid.
If they do, they are afraid, and I understand that. But enough is enough.
Colonel West, you saw that student, Mr. Caskey. He was obviously very upset. You saw this play out at that CNN forum, the town hall forum about guns, where the students were, you know, Marco Rubio, I see your face down the barrel of a gun. I mean, it was over and over and over and over. And blood money, it was all the classic lines against the NRA we've heard many times. But at this point, it seems different. It seems like the organization is very tight here. And what do conservatives do to respond? I mean, they could respond in kind, right, with their own boycotts, which I'm not really for, but their own boycotts of Alamo, Hertz, and so forth. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Well, it's good to be with you, Laura. And first and foremost, everyone needs to know in full disclosure, I am a sitting board member for the National Rifle Association. And so when I think about what Think Progress did just a week ago, saying that the NRA gave $10,000 to train Nicholas Cruz in firearm instruction, that was a false story, and the New York Daily News repeated it. The NRA stands for supporting youth shooting sports, and the high school junior ROTC team there at Stoneman Douglas High School, which it was in the district that I represented, it was to support their shooting sports team, their marksmanship team, who used Kevlar mats to shield a lot of those students. Some of those cadets did. And when I think about Enterprise and some of these other companies, we don't see anyone going out and attacking beer wholesalers or alcohol distributors when we have deaths due to DUIs and things of this nature. And to that student that assaulted, verbally assaulted Senator Marco Rubio, what about Planned Parenthood? The $568.7 million that they get as an abortion provider, and that's blood money. But what really incenses me more than anything else, no one in the United States of America remembers the name Stephen Williford. Stephen Williford is an NRA member. He is also an NRA-trained firearms instructor, and he was the one that ran to the sound of the guns in Sutherland Springs, Texas, at the First Baptist Church, and he was the one that took down that assailant. And no one is talking about that. But yet we had the Broward Sheriff's officers who did not run to the sound of the guns. So I don't think the NRA should be demonized.
It's unbelievable what we learned tonight, guys, about the poor Coral Springs police officers. They arrived. The Broward deputies, again, according to these reports, we'll see what ultimately is concluded, were behind their vehicles, and they told the Coral Springs police, you go in. I was like, oh, okay, you go in. And so they did go in. But, I mean, if there was red flag missed, it seems like there was mistakes made on the ground. The guy was obviously a mess. Tips that he was going to shoot up a school, at least a few tips that he was going to shoot up a school. Nothing. So, and it's the NRA's fault? I mean, this is I got to go to the CNN forum. And, Michelle, I want you to react to this. We had Andrew Klein on our show last night. He's a father of daughter Ariana Klein. She's a survivor of the shooting. She was at the White House the other day. He was called by CNN shortly after the shooting. This is how he described it. Let's listen.
I actually spoke to a CNN producer on Thursday, the day after the shooting, and the producer insinuated to me they were looking for people who were willing to espouse a certain narrative, which was taking the tragedy and turning it into a policy debate.
And by the way, Jake Tapper tweeted in response from CNN, "This is so dishonest. The student said her question was for Dana." That's why I said that. He's talking about that kid who said he was, they tried to script him. Read the transcript, and no, nothing was scripted, but people submit questions. We go to them expecting they'll ask the questions they submitted, which they're holding. So that was his tweet. Yeah. Michelle, your reaction to this. I know you've written columns about CNN's games that they played in years past.
I have, and I've been a longtime chronicler of how CNN has used these so-called citizen town halls to forge Democratic talking points. And these are not journalistic exercises. These are partisan political ones. In the past, they have tried to pass off as, quote unquote, undecided voters, people who were working for various Democratic political campaigns or Democratic office holders. It is no surprise. And I think it's interesting because on the one hand, the left is always saying, believe the children, listen to the children. But when certain children and their parents are telling the truth about the manipulation of this fake news, all of a sudden they are subject to this kind of criticism from the likes of Jake Lash, like lions in the den. And, you know, it is the collusion, I believe, between the social justice administrators of that school district who adopted radical liberal alternative conflict resolution policies, all for the cause of political correctness, and eradicating the fact that there were percentages of minority students. So rather than adjudicate anyone, they adjudicated no one. And that's how Nicholas Cruz got away with it.
All right, guys, the Manafort Gates, we had Rick Gates plead guilty today. The Mueller investigation, there's big pressure going to be put on Manafort, Paul Manafort, to also plead guilty. Squeeze is on. Colonel West, we got about 20 seconds. Your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, I want to say that Sheriff Scott Israel should step down. There's no way that he did not know what happened reviewing that surveillance video last week, Wednesday. Now, get into the Manafort Gates issue. This is Robert Mueller acting way outside the boundaries and the scope. The only collusion has been with Christopher Steele, Fusion GPS, the Hillary Clinton campaign, and DNC. That's where he should be looking.
All right, guys, great panel as always. And up next in the angle, I'm going to describe how a group of unelected judges actually could pose one of the biggest obstacles to enacting the Trump agenda. You're not going to want to miss a minute. And Brexit hero Nigel Farage is with us. Always great advice on how to keep the momentum of the Trump agenda going, the populist movement here and across the globe. Don't go away. Runaway judges versus the Trump agenda. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Today at CPAC, the president rallied the conservative faithful and urged them not to let up as the midterm elections approach.
Don't be complacent. Okay, don't be complacent, because if they get in, they will repeal your tax cuts. They will put judges in that you wouldn't believe. They'll take away your Second Amendment, which we will never allow to happen.
Judges matter. Let's take gun legislation. Now, even if the president and the Republican Congress are successful in pressing his agenda, life-tenured judges with radical outlooks can do it all. And that applies to a whole host of issues. And this is why it's so critical for President Trump to nominate and see confirmed as many judges as possible on both the district courts and the appellate courts. Now, since Trump took office, check this out. Major initiatives have been stalled or stopped altogether by the courts, including his travel ban on some majority Muslim countries, his plans to withhold federal funds from those sanctuary cities, his plan to rescind the DACA program, and just yesterday, his plan to end Obama-era oil and gas emission regs. And let's not forget the ban on transgender people in the military, serving in the military. So during just his first 9 months in office, cities or states filed 24 lawsuits against the president. According to Reuters, Obama was not subjected to similar lawsuits during the same time period. Now, a few weeks ago, New York District Court Judge Nicholas Garofis, he was a Clinton appointee, blocked President Trump's decision to end Obama's DACA program. He's the second federal judge to do so. Now, Judge Nick Garofis is an interesting character. When the DACA case landed on his bench last year, he reacted like an MSNBC pundit. He claimed that the president's ending the DACA program was, quote, arbitrary and capricious. Gracias, Judge Luis Gutierrez. This judge has a history of editorializing from the bench. And, of course, it ends up being like legislating from the bench. Americans didn't elect Judge Garofis to change our immigration policy. Certainly not the authority of the executive to enact sensible immigration regulations. He was appointed to be a check on other branches of government, not a replacement for them. So if Judge Garofis wants to get into legislating, he should take off his long black robes, pound the pavement, and then run for office. And, by the way, this isn't the first time that that judge crossed the line from impartial jurist to policymaker. In 2012, he imposed racial quotas on the New York City Fire Department as a way to address the complaints from minorities who failed the department's entrance exams. Now, declaring the fire department a, quote, bastion of white male privilege, Judge Garofis required the department to hire 2 black firefighters and 1 Hispanic for every 5 hired. Now, parts of his ruling were later vacated by the appeals court that questioned his impartiality. They barred him from presiding over future trials related to the case. That's how bad it was. Sadly, no one barred him from ruling on the DACA program. And frankly, he should have recused himself because his liberal bias was that obvious. Garofis sat on the bench and repeatedly slammed the president for his, quote, recurring, redundant drumbeat of anti-Latino commentary. Recurring, redundant drumbeat. Isn't that whole thing redundant? Oh, my gosh. It's just bad writing. Now, come on. Judge Garofis was blatant in his disdain for the president and his policies. Then the chief judge of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, Roger Gregory, wrote the majority opinion blocking the president's travel ban. Now, it's a different circuit. Now, it's the second time the Fourth Circuit has pulled this routine. This time, Judge Gregory, a George W. Bush appointee, believe it or not, claims that the president's travel restriction on 6 largely Muslim countries is unconstitutionally tainted with an animus toward Islam. For 285 unbelievably twisted pages, the ruling tries to turn Trump's campaign rhetoric into a legal argument. Gregory writes that the travel ban drips with religious intolerance, animus, and discrimination. Sounds like he's talking about his own opinion. They say the ban is an attempt to establish a national religion that excludes Muslims. That's what the Fourth Circuit ruled. Well, we're going to see how that reasoning holds up at the Supreme Court, which, by the way, has just announced that it's going to review these travel ban decisions on April 25th. Political grandstanding by jurists of the type that we just talked about, whether it's from the bench or in public forums. We saw what Justice Ginsburg said the other day about the bullying during the election and Hillary and the sexism. All of that ends up undermining confidence in the courts, and it certainly compromises our view of an impartial judiciary. And that goes, as I said, for the notorious RBG, Ginsburg, as well. The left wants to do through the courts what they couldn't achieve at the ballot box. It's so transparent to me. Now, Obama certainly knew this game. He was able to stack the federal bench with 334 judges. Clinton appointed 387 judges. And President Trump, well, he understands the threat posed by an activist judiciary. The president has had to deal with activist judges working against him ever since he took office.
I'll be criticized by them for speaking harshly about our courts. This new order was tailored to the dictates of the Ninth Circuit's, in my opinion, flawed ruling. This is, in the opinion of many, an unprecedented judicial overreach.
Now, there are currently 147 vacancies on the federal courts, 122 in the district courts, and 17 at that important appellate level. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell did a fantastic job in 2017 getting Trump nominees confirmed, a record 12 appeals court judges. Now, Obama only got 3 in his first year, so that's really good. Nevertheless, a lot of work remains to be done. The only way to counter the excesses of life-tenured judges like Garofis is for Trump to fill the bench with his own jurists, men and women who stay within their constitutional boundaries. Meanwhile, we'll continue on this show to expose the arbitrary and capricious rulings of judges who frustrate the public will and exceed their Article III authority. And that's the angle. Joining us now for a reaction just outside of the Washington, D.C. is he's at CPAC, Nigel Farage, Fox News contributor and former UK Independence Party leader. All right, Nigel, you're there at CPAC with all those activists. And the president talked about the judges today in his speech and how if we don't keep this momentum going, you know, we won't get judges on the courts and a lot of his agenda can be undone. What was your sense from the president's speech?
Well, of course, it's all about the midterms, isn't it, really? I mean, he's achieved amazing things. He said today that he kept more promises than he'd actually made during the election campaign, which was a great line. But he's doing his stuff. He got tax reform through just before Christmas. Very, very important. But he needs to make sure that he keeps majorities in both of those houses in the midterms. So how does he keep the Trump revolution rolling? Well, I'll tell you something. I shared a platform with him in Mississippi back in the presidential campaign. He went round the country speaking to big audiences. He's a wonderful motivator. But what I saw today was a president in a different gear. A president who was using humour. A president who was light. A president who even told a joke against himself about his own bald patch. And I think if Trump goes round the country in the run-up to these midterms and performs anything like he did today at CPAC, he will keep this momentum going, and that'll lead through to everything he needs to do.
Yeah, Nigel, you and I ran into each other this morning, and you were nice enough to agree to come on the show tonight, which is so awesome. But it was right before the president spoke. I spoke at around 9 o'clock. And what I was trying to do, and I know you said this as well, you had such a great speech, that we need to be happy warriors. I mean, we're winning on all these big issues. The left is resistant. This whole dour, conservative, you know, hangdog kind of approach, it's tedious. Nobody wants to be on that ride.
Look, career politicians are as dull as ditch water. Why? They're always being safe. They don't want to take a risk. All they care about is getting re-elected. They're not doing this out of passion, belief in country, patriotism, caring about ordinary people. They are dull. They are humorless. They are without any real personality. And what sparkled today from the president was him being him. And I was very, very privileged, Laura, to meet you this morning, but I was also very privileged to meet the president just after he came off stage, and I saw a man there, you know, absolutely at the top of his game. I get the feeling that this president is now really enjoying what he's doing. You're seeing his real personality coming out, and I have to say, my view, and I've watched this, and I've followed this, and I've been part of this, even though I'm a foreigner, but my view is with Trump, the best is yet to come.
Yeah, I mean, he referred to the next 7 years, clearly putting to rest these ideas he's not going to run for re-election. I want to play for you the media's reaction to the president's hour-plus-long speech. Let's watch.
This morning at CPAC, he covered at least 31 different topics in an hour and 15-minute speech, but it took almost 40 minutes before the president began his conversation on the Parkland school shooting.
President Trump made time in his CPAC speech today to address his bald spot, yet nothing on Russian election meddling.
Both at CPAC and at his news conference, he conveniently avoided talk of his new, tougher position on guns.
Nigel, I mean, the president was self-deprecating, which the media had complained he never was. I howled. We were watching it in our hotel room. We were all screaming. My producers, we were just screaming. It was so funny, and it lightened the mood. But they literally can never say anything positive. It doesn't matter what he does. Even if he pushes some gun control measures, they say it's not enough. It's unbelievable.
No, of course they don't. And you remember with Ronald Reagan, it was exactly the same. They never ever forgave Reagan for winning once and then twice, and they kept at him all the way through his presidency. But you know what? He goes down in history as one of the great presidents. And I don't think it matters anymore what CNN say or the New York Times write. It doesn't matter. The world has changed. You know, people out there, ordinary folk, decent, ordinary people who live their lives, do their jobs, pay their taxes, obey the laws, bring up their families. They don't care anymore what mainstream media is telling them.
Yeah.
Do you know what? They make up their own minds.
I think you're right. The progress has left them behind, and it's almost not worth engaging with them or getting demoralized or distracted by what they're saying or the constant resistance. Move the ball down the field, get great legislation passed, do the stuff that he's already done, and then some. I want to show a poll on screen. U.S. satisfaction with world standing hits 13-year high. 45% positive rating. 2017, it was 32%. 2005, it was 48%. That's the Gallup poll. So, Nigel, my question to you is, how are we being viewed, do you sense, internationally? Americans are happy with how they think we're being viewed by the rest of the world under Trump. At least it's gone up. It's still not a majority. But that's good news, considering where they predicted he was going to take us.
Well, let's be fair. Obama was a disaster. America's standing in the world went down considerably during the 8-year period. And everyone said that Trump on the world stage would be an embarrassment. He'd be a dummy. He wouldn't know how to behave. And do you know what? Right from that Riyadh speech, his first speech, through to Davos, where he delivered the line, you know, America first, but America not alone, did it beautifully, and people understood it all the way through. He has behaved on the international stage with huge dignity, with great confidence. In fact, when he was in Beijing walking around, I thought he was about to put a bid in to buy the place. You know,
that would be nice. Yeah, we need that to happen. We don't even have time to get into the China thing, but he's finally, he's actually the first president to address the China threat in a substantive way on trade, and not afraid to say so, Nigel, which is fantastic. Nigel, thank you so much for joining us. We got to roll, but have a great time. It was great to see you today, and fantastic speech. And by the way, a lot of you watching have asked this question of yourselves. Could you be fired from your job for merely expressing your political views? Well, up next, we're going to talk to someone who worked for one of the top tech companies in the world here in the United States.
Many companies caved to liberals, cut ties with NRA. Over a dozen companies have cut ties with the National Rifle Association after being pressured to end their agreements by liberal activists. In the wake of the school shooting on February 14, social media users have started to press companies listed as working with the NRA to drop their affiliation. Delta Airlines, MetLife, United Airlines, Hertz and First National Bank are among the companies that have ended discounts programs, NRA-related credit cards or any other program that might have supported the group. Just as ending the agreements will risk sparking anger among conservative supporters, it could attract customers who had previously felt they could not part with their cash to a company that supported one of the most powerful but divisive organizations in the U.S., Newsweek wrote in an article that accompanied the current list. Boycott NRA has become a trending hashtag on Twitter, with many retweeting companies that post that they have ended their association with the NRA. Radio host Tony Katz spoke out against these companies on Fox News Saturday. This is the list of companies that don't believe in freedom of thought or freedom of expression, Katz said. He then urged viewers to study the list and know that these companies are basically saying, how dare you think differently? We punish you for it. Now they're basing business practice on thought policing, and that has to be dealt with, Katz said. Host Leland Vittert said that MetLife, who has broken its ties with the NRA, has a similar association with the Teamsters, who are also a political group, but the insurance provider did not provide a statement when inquired. Vittert added that the left has been fairly successful at boycott campaigns by using social media, but the right not so much. They have to go out there and make their voices heard, Katz said of the Conservatives. They like simple things. Well, those days are over. If you think you can fight back by simply saying that's wrong and that's really unjust, that's not enough. Many of the Conservative hosts, according to Katz, are also in the camp of Fire Sheriff Israel. He was giving politician answers and not giving us the truth, he said of Israel's presence at an event Wednesday night. He added that any companies that support freedom of thought and still support NRA members, Katz will run a free ad for them every day. What do you think? Scroll down to comment below.